Hello and welcome. Tonight we're speaking about ayahuasca. With me is Larry Norris, a PhD student at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Larry, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, tell me about your research at the California Institute.
Well, right now I'm working on a project which involves a large database of experiences that were collected from a research center in southern Brazil run by Dr. Luis Eduardo Luna. The research center is called Ayahuasca, and it is a place that studies consciousness, visionary art, and psychointegrator plants. Psychointegrator is a term used by Michael Winkelmann, who has an interesting perspective on shamanism from a neurobiological point of view, and he looks at psychointegrators as something that integrates a holistic picture of the mind functions. But there's a lot of different terms. I noticed that we have psychotropic, psychedelic, entheogenic, psychomimetic, and quite a few other terms to talk about this experience. The term that I prefer is entheogenic, which refers to seeking the divine within, and this was a term created by Wasson and Ott, I believe in the 70s, or late 70s, and it's sort of a term that's gaining more credit in the recent days, just because terms like psychedelic have a tendency to have a little bit of baggage attached to them.
So really what we're speaking about is the noetic experience. It's seeking the knowledge from within that
Yes.
the plant gives us.
Exactly.
So we look at these as sacred plant teachers.
Sacred medicines, absolutely. And
Yes.
plant teacher is a really fantastic term because it really speaks to the idea that there's a presence or a wisdom within this plant that is outside of us. It's not just our higher self, which we're learning from, but maybe perhaps something that's wiser and more knowledgeable about the Earth's functions.
Now, ayahuasca it's used up and down the Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
How widely do you find it in Peru and Brazil?
It's actually, in Peru, it's legal. Chile actually just passed some legislation within the last few weeks to make it legal there as well. Brazil, it's legal within a sacred context, a religious context, but that law changed in 2009. Previous 2009, it could be used in any sort of way for religion or studies or research. Now it's pretty much only in the Santo Daime Church, the União de Vegetal, or the Barraquinha, the three main syncretic churches in Brazil. Peru, it's pretty well known, and like I said, it's legal there, so there's not any issues as far as legality, and so a lot of people go down there. There's a big ayahuasca tourism, they call it, Westerners going down there to sort of partake. There's a lot of debate about whether or not this is good for anyone involved. But what's interesting is there's some people that say, even indigenous cultures that say the ayahuasca wants to be heard, and the ayahuasca is helping us make a connection to sort of the eco-mind again, the Gaia, the Earth, the planet, and reconnecting us to what we've lost as far as now we're in these cities with technology and we've forgotten that there's plants that grow everywhere and that there's earth underneath all this cement, and just sort of reconnecting us to that.
The shamans in these indigenous cultures use these teacher plants to help their societies stay in tune with the nature around them.
Yes and no, because I think the dis-ease of the Western cultures, we've lost that connection because our containing myth, it's not part of our containing myth, it's not part of what we do naturally. But in their cultures, they're surrounded by plants, everything is animistic, there's spirit within everything you see. So it's not such a large step for them in that regard. So typically in traditional cultures, it is used for more healing, divination, for community gatherings, for building community, that type of thing. Finding out about weather, other types of divination.
Let's talk about the psychotropic, the active part of the drug. It's a very unique combination of a vine and a leaf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the two different components of the ayahuasca brew, one is a vine called the Banisteriopsis caapi, and that contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and the leaf is a Cicatrol viridis, and that contains a DMT molecule. So naturally occurring in our bodies, we already have DMT running through our system. So
dimethyltryptamine?
Dimethyltryptamine, and dimethyltryptamine, I believe, is the full. So if we were to drink DMT, it wouldn't be orally active because our belly has components in it that break it down and metabolize it right away. However, with the combination of the vine, which has the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. It inhibits the metabolites in our belly so that when the DMT is drunk, we're able to have this experience. Smoked DMT or even Strassman's work with the injected DMT causes immediate experience because it doesn't go into the belly. It goes straight through the blood-brain barrier. However, if it's drunk, it has to be added with this other vine. There's a lot of stories about how this was originally found. Like I think we were talking earlier about McKenna says there's 50,000 plants within a square mile,
50,000 species within a square mile of tropical rainforest. Right. And then the idea of knowing to combine the vine of one and the leaf of another is really amazing.
It's amazing, yeah. Through trial and error, it doesn't seem like it would be possible, especially because they don't grow right next to each other. They grow in slightly different areas.
Right.
I think Jeremy Narby said that through he's an anthropologist from, I believe, Montreal, and he says that that these plants initially, maybe perhaps it was the vine that was drunk by itself, and the natural DMT in the body was able to work because the monoamine oxidase was inhibited in the belly. And the shamans of that era say that the plant told them to add this other plant. So again, it goes into the plant teacher. How do we get these insights or this knowledge from these from a plant? You know, I mean, it really sort of a little bit mind-bending here. It makes us realize that we're not the top of the hierarchy as we as humans sometimes like to think, you know.
There's an interesting board of directors at that facility. It includes Jeremy Narby,
Dennis McKenna,
Dennis McKenna, and some other good people.
Yes, Stan Groff, Richard Tarnas, Luis Eduardo Luna, who runs it. He used to work with Pablo Moringa once upon a time, and now he's kind of working. He just retired from his job. He had a teaching job, and he just retired, so he's going to fully focus on Ayahuasca. It's an amazing place. There are plants growing everywhere, so you can really connect with the plants, and his library is full of really great information, and he's been collecting these interviews for quite some time, previous 2009, of course.
And have you spent a lot of time there?
I've been there 3 times. I've probably spent close to 2 months down there. I'm hoping to perhaps write my dissertation down there as well, just to be close to the plants and be in the environment and, see what happens. Yeah.
So you've been given access to all of these accounts. How many are you studying?
Currently, right now, my database consists of 1,000, but I have plenty more that I haven't transcribed yet. I think the 1,000 were around 800 pages once I was all done transcribing. What was interesting about the research was that, first thing I did was I basically created or put them into different themes. As it was such a huge project, I used the already established themes of Benny Shannon, who wrote The Antipodes of the Mind, charting the phenomenology of the ayahuasca experience. And he has 8 different components of themes of vision, so to speak. So I went through and ran a word cloud once I adjusted for the themes. But the thing that I found interesting and was slightly different than Benny Shannon's work was that virtual reality scenes, or what's called full-fledged scenes, this is a particular type of vision that is more intense. There's 2 different types in this full-fledged category, grand scenes and virtual reality. Grand scenes are known to have sort of a really sort of like a big movie that you're in, but not quite fully, and you're watching it, but you can still feel a little distance from it. And during the grand scene, one particular aspect of it is it has a deep spiritual and psychological impact. The virtual reality scene is a whole nother ballgame, because what you're talking about in virtual reality is this hyper reality, this more real than real place where you don't even realize that this even exists anymore. You're in a place where there are entities that are talking to you, you're moving through multi-dimensional space, your body's being taken apart. There's a term that Benny Shannon works or uses called active interaction, and sort of this interaction with the space, and if you're having this interaction, then it becomes a virtual reality scene. What was interesting, though, is that he believes that the full-fledged scenes happen in more of a rare occurrence. It doesn't happen as often as expected. I found, given the right set and setting, that this actually happens around 60 to 65% of the time. Why that's important, especially from I'm studying it on multiple levels here, but from a psychological point of view, it's important. There's some work by a man named Frank Eckenhofer who's done what's called, he's looking into spontaneous image narratives. So the unfolding or the unlocking of these narratives that are in us to help us heal and also help us with spiritual growth. But again, that asks another question. These narratives, where are the narratives coming from? Are they coming from ourself, from our higher self, or is it a plant teacher that's telling us these narratives? So it's this fine line that we have to walk as we're scientists and psychologists, but at the same time we're dealing with things that science can't measure at this point.
Now, you've experienced these states yourself.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what's interesting is that you're studying them as a scientist, but you are also including your own experience into your work.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. It's like studying a dream without ever having had a dream. There's R. Gordon Wasson, who's really well known for his work with mushrooms, mentions that he says there's two classes of people, and this is for mushrooms, not ayahuasca, but it kind of goes along the same lines. One class is the one who has tried the mushrooms and is disqualified because of his subjective experience, his or her subjective experience. The second class of person has never tried the mushroom, and they're disqualified by their complete ignorance of the subject, meaning it's such an unusual space, and you hear over and over again, I can't even bring words to this. There's ineffable qualities that happen. So to try and explain that without actually having to have experienced it is really difficult to do.
So it's a catch-22. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Exactly. However, I find that at least exploring the realm, there's a term, and it's been kind of used for a different thing, but I think it works well here. It's called intergalactic anthropology, right? And so we're out exploring these spaces that we didn't even know existed before we had tried these medicines. So what exists in these spaces? Who's there? Is there people there? Or is there things, entities there? What types of places can we go to, et cetera? So there's so much work that can still be done. The entheogenic experience in general is huge.
It does seem like it's a repeatable experience, and the experiences that you're having are consistent?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. There's a consistency to the uniqueness of the places that you go to. And what I found actually by looking at two different transcripts of mine from 5 years difference, I was actually learning similar lessons within the 5 years, but I had forgotten the lessons. So I was going back to learn those lessons again. Whether or not the experience is repeatable, totally repeatable, that's maybe not the case, but as far as like repeatable in the sense of a mystical experience, that's what makes, for me, these plants unique. Because when you study yoga or meditation, or when people have spontaneous experiences, you can never be there to like catch it. You don't know when it's going to happen. But here, through the Pankey study, which was a study done in the 60s, or the Griffith study, which is a recent study done through Johns Hopkins, we found that around 75 to 80% of the time, under the right set and setting with these experiences, a sense of a full-blown mystical experience occurs. So if you're interested in mystical experience, this is definitely a good place to look.
Now you have a painting of one of your experiences, and there's a purple light there, very interesting purple light.
Yeah, I work with paintings a lot to help integrate the experiences. That's a really important part of this. There's a term that we use at CIS called spiritual bypassing, where you're constantly seeking for the next experience without ever actually having to learn or having learned from the experience that you previously had. And this constant seeking doesn't allow you to really establish a base or ground to work off of. But with integration, and this is something that we're doing with our organization called Erie, is working with these peer integration groups, giving an opportunity for people to share experiences, to talk through it, to learn from them. And I use art as a way to integrate these experiences. I think the one particular painting you're talking about is actually a funny story behind that, because the lady was talking about the way that the planets were formed, right? And she said, I realized, through her journey, I realized that there was no Big Bang. It was just an alien blowing bubbles. And I was kind of a little bit like, ooh, this is going to be hard to work with. How am I going to, I'm trying to think that fine line of science and mystical experiences. So I was kind of like, how am I going to work with this? And then I found out a couple days later that the way that protoplanets are formed is that the sun will break filaments off in bubbles, if you will, and then those will float off into space and create protoplanets. So even though she wasn't using the right terminology, she was right on as far as like the process. So I painted that painting for her.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Jeremy Narby talks about getting access to the submolecular level with these sort of plants. And in his book, The Cosmic Serpent, he speaks about DNA and the similarity of DNA and some of the serpent-like shapes that people experience regularly with ayahuasca.
Yeah, the serpent is actually that's really interesting to me as well. That I found the serpent was the #1 animal featured in my research. However, all these people came from countries that weren't immersed in the ayahuasca culture. So these are 35 different cultures from around the world, and they're still having experiences of big cats, jaguars, feline figures, and snakes. So again, what archetype is this snake, and how does it relate to our experiences? I think there's so much to learn about DNA too. I mean, they're finding all this work now with junk DNA, and it's not really junk DNA, but it's just like turning on, turning off kind of mechanisms. But I think like the serpent, it has, in some cultures it's the evil serpent, and in other cultures, it's the healer. I think Asclepius, who's the medical staff with a single serpent, is a good, good way to look at the serpents. Initially, I don't know, do you know the story of Asclepius?
I don't.
Okay, so Asclepius was a healer in the Greek mythology, and he was healing somebody. Typically, he heals people in like spas, and he was working with dream work and herbs and that type of thing. A snake came into the room, and he killed it with his staff because he didn't want to have the snake in there. But then what ended up happening was that another snake came in and put herbs in the snake's mouth, and he saw the snake be revived. So he realized that the snake was a symbol of healing. So now the staff of Asclepius is sort of our symbol of healing.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned part of the experience for some people is having your body taken apart.
Sure.
Yeah, I've read where it's almost like a death. You have a death of the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I think in Quechua, or in the Quechua language, ayahuasca means vine of death or vine of souls. And actually, there is, a big part of the shamanic journey is the dismemberment. But I think, even people that aren't necessarily training for shamanism can go through these types of experiences where, from a psychological perspective, we would say it was an ego death,
yes.
right? From a shamanic perspective, we would perhaps say that we were being worked on through the doctores, the doctors, the plant doctors, and healing for as long as we're in these human bodies, we're technically not totally healed. We're still working through lessons and things of that nature. This isn't our natural state, and this is something that you find in the ayahuasca journey as well. Is that people are saying, "Oh, I went home. I went to the place that I've always been, and I knew it. And I looked around, and it was all my friends and people I was familiar with, and I came to realize, like, wait a second, this is just a moment in time, my human life, and then this is my home over here."
So it was new, but it wasn't new.
Right,
It
exactly.
was new, but it wasn't foreign.
Exactly, yeah. And I think Huxley, once upon a time, used a term, and I don't know what his term was, but basically, like, everything was fresh as the day of creation, and so you go to these places, and even though you're familiar with it, everything's fresh and new, and like, you're vibrant with energy.
Well, Huxley talks about our minds having a reducing valve because you can't make a living having these experiences all the time. So
sure.
Nature gives us a reducing valve, and we're able to experience these things, that they are real. But we can only have the experience by changing that reducing valve or twisting it so that we can allow these experiences to flow through us.
Right, and there's so many different ways to work with these reducing valves. Our brain is sort of like, our brain's one function is to help us work here. But like, you can take this part off, or turn that part off, or turn this switch on, or turn that switch on, and experience many different types of consciousness. We found this through meditation, yoga, all different types of entheogens, from DMT and salvia and ayahuasca to mushrooms to even some of these new synthetic shulgin materials.
Let's talk about Erie.
Mm-hmm.
You arranged an amazing conference.
Thank you.
What does Erie stand for?
So Erie is a group we put together. It stands for Entheogenic Research, Integration, and Education. So there are three main points for us here. The research is that we're all students, so we're all doing research of our own, and so we're coming together to find a place to talk about our research, spread the word, so to speak, give lectures, give talks, give discussions, dialogues, think tanks of that nature. The second point is integration. This is a really important point, and actually right now it seems like we just had an integration circle last night. It seems to be a really big gap in the Bay Area. Right now, probably in this area, there's probably 200 to 300 people journeying every month at least. And they're coming back from these experiences, and there's really no container to hold it. It's hard to talk to somebody about it. Even your good friend that might be having experiences as well, it's hard for somebody to sit down for 10 minutes and hear a journey. So a lot of times there's this gap of people not being able to work or integrate through their experiences. So we have these peer integration circles we're working with right now. That's just an opportunity to share and sort of be a witness to your own journey by speaking it. Sometimes I think it's called secondary revisionism. It was a term that Jung used to talk about once you say your experience, you're sort of re-looking at it and reshaping it and co-creating it, if you will.
It seems that not the least of the problem is the fact that these are Schedule III drugs they've been driven underground because they're illegal.
Schedule 1 drugs.
Schedule 1.
Yeah, Schedule 1s. They're as bad as heroin and cocaine. Right. Or actually, I think heroin and cocaine are Schedule 2. So somehow that's a really, it's interesting that DMT, which naturally occurs in your body, is also Schedule 1. So
right, we're all illegal.
Yeah, we're all illegal, exactly. Yeah.
So what are the goals for Erie in the future?
So the goals for Erie in the future, I forgot to mention the third point, it was education, but that all kind of goes with the research side.
Sure.
So the goals for Erie for the future is to sort of create space to be able to talk about this work. 2 years ago, we weren't really even able we were able to have conversations. CIS fantastically has been a space where you could have these dialogues. Stan Groff teaches there, Ralph Metzner taught there once upon a time. So the dialogue has been there, but unfortunately culture has kind of been against it. So now we're in this beautiful moment where the window of opportunity feels open because of the studies at Johns Hopkins, the studies at UCLA, the studies at NYU.
Right.
Now these mainstream institutions are doing this work, and people are starting to say, hey, wait a second, there's something here, there's something going on.
Good.
So basically our focus would be, to continue this work. I think right now, though, seeing the big gap in the integration, that's probably going to be our main focus for the time being. And, right now, the APA, unfortunately, doesn't really have a language for that, for an entheogenic experience. The APA, the main dialogue of psychologists and psychiatrists, becomes, they can only really relate to dreams or relate to it as a pathology, and that doesn't work for somebody that's had the experience. So a big question is, I ask many people that I know, would you rather go to a therapist who is versed in therapy but doesn't have the language for entheogenic experiences, or somebody who doesn't have any therapeutic experience but is versed in the language of entheogens? And typically people will be interested in the entheogenic language, if you will.
So do you think one goal should be to integrate this experience and this language into the psychological vocabulary?
I think, that's all. There's a lot of...
Terence McKenna called psychologists and psychiatrists a nascent shamanic class, but we need to unshackle them.
Right, exactly.
As he put it.
Exactly. And that's kind of, you wonder, does talking about these experiences and putting a psychological language on them lessen the experience? And that's sort of the danger there. It's the fine line we have to walk. But I think as we go on, we start to realize, that's the beautiful thing about California Institute of Integral Studies. The integral part is blending these different ideas, these different opinions, mysticism and science, and how do they come together? I think this is something that, Strassman talks about in DMT, the spirit molecule, is like, here you have this molecule that consistently creates this type of experience, and so we have a scientific, mystical, meeting point, so to speak, through this molecule, which is the same molecule that's found in the ayahuasca.
Were you surprised at the response to the Erie conference? It was sold out.
Yeah, that was another thing that was really very surprising for us, and I think that just sort of gave us a little bit more confidence in the fact that the window was open, and we stay humble in the fact that we understand that there's more going on than just us. There are other elements happening, and perhaps we're getting help from the spirit, if you will, or the mother. As Sri Aurobindo and the mother are sort of the seeds for CIS. So kind of looking at it as like saying, well, perhaps there are other things that are happening here, and that spirit is guiding us as well. But I think the attendance was amazing, and we have events happening. We actually have an event October 6th coming up, which is going to be a talk on alchemy, entheogens, and archetypes. We have a symposium on November 4th, which is going to include Robert Forte. I'm actually going to come in and talk as an artist, which will be nice. I won't be talking as an academic. I'll take my academic hat off and put my artist hat on, which will be great, and about 4 or 5 other speakers. So it's going to be pretty incredible. Yeah.
You're interested in Jung, and particularly the Red Book. Do you want to talk about how that figures into your studies?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that the Red Book wasn't published until just maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I think the family was a little resistant because, Jung is already working with this very fine area. He's working with transpersonal experiences in psychological language. So I think the Red Book was really like, whoa, this is totally have you seen the Red Book?
I haven't looked at it.
So it's it's huge, and it's like he has a lot of drawings in there that he's done, and everything's calligraphy and really, really beautiful book. But you know, there's a lot of connection with his wisdom characters in there. For example, like Philemon or other characters like that. And one thing that he talked about is that, you know, one of his characters, Philemon, said, you know, we're not part of your imagination or your psyche. We're actual beings. We're real. You know, and I think that was a really sort of eye-opening read for me, because, you know, here you are having Jung talking about psychotherapy, but at the same time having these experiences where he's connecting deeply with these characters, if you will.
Well, it's one step to believe in a collective unconscious, and then another step to believe that, well, actually these are real entities, and it's not our unconscious, it's just another dimension.
Yeah, and I actually just read some really interesting research the other day while we're on the topic of Jung. There was a conference, an LSD conference in 1959, right? What, an LSD conference in 1959, progressive 1959? Wait, that's strange, right? But there's this guy there who had worked with giving LSD to therapists. So he had 2 Freudian therapists and 2 Jungian therapists in his group, right? And he found that when he gave the substances to the Freudians and the Jungians, they had what was to be expected. So the Freudians typically had experiences of childhood memories. The Jungians typically had experiences of the transpersonal nature. And when each of them had the expected experience, they had healing, or there was some sort of like transformation that happened for them. However, he said when the Freudians had a transpersonal experience, they totally were not able to work with it. There was no container for that. So when they accidentally had the Jungian type experience, they weren't able to integrate it, and they had no healing or no transformation from that. So again,
because they didn't have a language for it.
Yeah, language.
Isn't that interesting? You need the language.
Exactly, yeah. And it also speaks to the idea of set and setting, which is a topic that was brought up by Metzner once upon a time. Not just the setting of the place, but the set which is inside of us, what we bring to the experience ourselves.
Well, Larry, do you believe that it would be a good idea for people to express their experiences with these substances, and also express their desire that they be legal and we be free to experiment with our own consciousness?
I'm all for cognitive liberty, as far as for each of us individually to find out what we would like to explore consciously. There's also the fine line of the Timothy Leary, everyone, you know, do, but there's no container for this type of experience. So I think decriminalization would be kind of a better project, because legalization, you think about restrictions and all these other types of things that are applied by the government. Decriminalization is more of just sort of a lack of illegality, if you will, and maybe allows for people to explore a little deeper. And, you know, I mean, that there's a whole other part of the set and setting, which is that as long as these substances are legal, in the back of your head, if you're doing it in a country that it's illegal, there's this worry, there's this concern, and that can shape how your journey comes about. So yeah, I think that the types of research that we could work with, especially when we can work with, you know, these blending of the Western thought and the indigenous thought and all these other different types of spiritual thought come together and work with these types of medicines. I think there can be a lot of really great stuff to learn, but until it becomes legal or decriminalized, it'll be really challenging to work with.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Larry Norris of the California Institute of Integral Studies, thank you for coming here and talking to us about your experiences.
No problem. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching. Good night.